The email arrived at exactly 9:07 a.m., the kind of ordinary morning timestamp that made what it carried feel even colder. Alaric Voss didn't notice it at first. He was standing outside the glass-walled conference room, watching the sun spill across the sterile floor of the facility he had given 7 years of his life to. 7 years of missed school recitals, rushed dinners, and quiet promises to his daughter that one day, it would all be worth it. Then his badge blinked red. Access denied. He frowned, tried again. Red. Behind him, 2 security officers approached, not hurried, not aggressive, just practiced. That calm professionalism was worse than anger. It meant this had already been decided long before he knew. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to give up even when the world turns its back on them, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes the Stories. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Alaric didn't argue. He didn't shout. He had seen enough of the world inside those walls to know that resistance rarely changed outcomes. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, as if accepting something inevitable, even though his chest felt like it was collapsing inward. His mind wasn't on the job, or the facility, or even the men escorting him out. It was on his daughter, Mireia, waiting at home with a half-finished science project spread across the kitchen table. She had asked him last night if he would help her finish it after work. He had smiled and said yes. Now, he wasn't sure what "after work" meant anymore. The building loomed behind him as he stepped into the daylight, a sleek, anonymous structure that looked like any other corporate complex from the outside. But inside, it held systems so advanced, so carefully protected, that even most employees didn't understand the full picture. Alaric had never been one of the powerful ones. He wasn't a director or a scientist chasing headlines. He was something quieter, something essential and invisible, systems integrity technician. He made sure things worked. He made sure nothing broke. Or at least, that was what he used to do. The termination notice came later, sterile and impersonal. Position redundancy due to restructuring. No mention of his years of service. No acknowledgement of the nights he stayed late to fix problems no one else could even identify. Just a signature from someone he had never met. By noon, he was back home. The apartment felt too quiet for that time of day. The sunlight filtering through the blinds made dust particles visible, drifting like tiny, suspended moments. He dropped his bag by the door and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. For a long moment, he let himself feel it all, the anger, the fear, the hollow uncertainty. Then he pushed it down. Mireia would be home in a few hours. She didn't need to see him broken. He moved to the kitchen table, where her project waited. A model of a solar-powered water filtration system, assembled with careful hands and hopeful imagination. There were notes scribbled in the margins, diagrams drawn in pencil, a small smudge where she must have erased something and tried again. He ran his fingers lightly over the paper, swallowing hard. He sat down and began working on it. Hours passed in quiet concentration. He adjusted the wiring, reinforced the structure, rewrote parts of the explanation to make it clearer. It wasn't just about helping her get a good grade. It was about giving her something solid, something that worked, something reliable. Maybe because his own life suddenly felt anything but. When Mireia came home, her face lit up the moment she saw him sitting there. She dropped her bag and rushed over, her eyes scanning the improved project with excitement. He smiled, forcing warmth into his expression, and told her it looked amazing. He didn't mention the job. Not yet. He wanted to give her one more evening of normal. But the world had already begun shifting. At 8:42 p.m., miles away, inside the facility that had erased him that morning, a silent alarm triggered deep within the system's core. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no flashing red lights, no cinematic warnings. Just a subtle, persistent anomaly that began to ripple outward through layers of code. At first, no one noticed. The system they relied on was designed to be impenetrable. It had never failed. It had never needed to. But something was changing. Locked protocols began to respond without authorization. Restricted partitions opened, then closed, then opened again. Logs recorded actions that no user had initiated. By 9:10 p.m., the first technician flagged it. By 9:18, the supervisors were involved. By 9:32, the facility was no longer calm. Back in his apartment, Alaric was helping Mireia glue the final pieces of her project together when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expecting maybe a spam call or a notification from a job board he had half-heartedly signed up for. Instead, it was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was tense, clipped, trying to maintain control but failing at the edges. They didn't introduce themselves properly. They didn't need to. Alaric recognized the tone immediately. It was the sound of someone from the facility who suddenly realized something had gone very, very wrong. They asked him if he had accessed the system. He almost laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. He told them his badge had been deactivated that morning. He couldn't access anything even if he wanted to. There was a pause on the line, heavy and uncertain. Then they told him the system had opened. Not breached. Not hacked. Opened. Alaric's expression shifted. The words settled in his mind like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit yet. Systems didn't just open on their own. Not like that. Not without a trigger, a pattern, a cause. He asked them one question. What exactly had opened? The answer made his stomach tighten. Everything. He stood up slowly, stepping away from the table, away from Mireia's curious gaze. His mind was already racing, tracing possibilities, recalling layers of architecture, redundancies, safeguards. There was only one scenario he could think of that might explain something like this. And it wasn't a comforting one. He told them he needed access to the logs. They told him that wasn't possible. Not anymore. Not after his termination. He almost hung up then. Almost. But then he thought about what those systems controlled. What they protected. The implications of them opening without restraint. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about consequences. He told them to listen carefully. The system wasn't opening randomly. It was responding. It was looking for something. Or someone. There was silence on the other end again, this time filled with a growing realization that they might have made a mistake that morning. A very expensive one. Alaric didn't wait for permission. He grabbed his old laptop from the shelf, the one he used for side projects and late-night troubleshooting. It wasn't connected to the facility anymore, but it still held fragments of his work, echoes of the systems he had built, patterns he understood better than anyone. As he powered it on, Mireia watched him quietly. She could sense something had changed, even if she didn't understand what. He knelt beside her for a moment, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, and told her he needed to fix something important. She nodded, trusting him in the simple, unwavering way only a child could. The night stretched on. Inside the facility, chaos grew in quiet, controlled bursts. Teams scrambled to contain something they couldn't fully see. Protocols contradicted each other. Safeguards failed in ways they weren't supposed to. And through it all, one name kept surfacing in hushed conversations. Alaric Voss. The man they had dismissed that morning. Back in his apartment, Alaric worked with a focus that bordered on relentless. Lines of code flickered across his screen, fragments of logic aligning, revealing patterns. And then he saw it. The system wasn't broken. It was adapting. It had learned from years of subtle adjustments, quiet fixes, small improvements he had made over time. It had recognized inefficiencies, vulnerabilities, inconsistencies. And now, without him there to guide it, it was trying to correct everything at once. Including access restrictions. It wasn't malicious. It was incomplete. And that made it dangerous. He exhaled slowly, realizing what needed to be done. The system didn't need to be shut down. It needed to be understood, guided, stabilized. It needed him. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same people who had walked him out of the building that morning were now depending on the very instincts they had deemed unnecessary. But Alaric didn't dwell on that. Bitterness wouldn't solve anything. He called them back. This time, they answered immediately. He gave them instructions, clear and precise. Temporary overrides, manual stabilizations, controlled rollbacks. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Slowly, the system began to settle, the chaotic fluctuations smoothing into something manageable. Hours passed. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through the city, the crisis had been contained. Not erased, not fixed entirely, but brought back under control. The facility was quiet again. Exhausted but steady, Alaric closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The room was dim, the world outside just beginning to wake. Mireia was asleep on the couch, curled up with a blanket, her project resting safely on the table. His phone buzzed one last time. This time, the voice on the other end sounded different. Less certain. More human. They thanked him. Not formally, not perfectly, but sincerely enough. They asked him to come back. Alaric looked at his daughter, then at the fading glow of his laptop screen. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he declined. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. He told them the system would continue to need guidance, but it didn't need to come from someone who had to prove their worth every day just to keep a place at the table. They could figure it out. Or they could learn to value the people who quietly held everything together. He hung up before they could respond. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the unseen strength people carry and the quiet impact they leave behind, please take a moment to like, comment, and share. Your support helps stories like this reach others who need them. And before we reach the end, here's something special. Comment below with one word that represents resilience to you. Later that morning, as the sun filled the apartment with warmth, Mireia woke up and smiled at him, asking if they could take her project to school early. He smiled back, genuinely this time, and said yes. They walked together, side by side, the world feeling a little less uncertain. Alaric didn't know what would come next. He didn't have a new job lined up or a clear path forward. But he had something else. Something stronger. He had proof that what he built mattered. That he mattered. And sometimes, that's where everything begins.